continuing here. So the circle that has 9 divisions means that this 9 divisions per each of its 12 sectors, it essentially then becomes a circle that has 108 increments. And they found 27 stars that lined up with the first 4 little increments and then the second 4 increments and like that. So they were able to tell the increments through these stars, nakshatras they were called. And so each nakshatra, which represented an increment within a month, was given a certain property, quality. If you're born in the beginning of the month of spring, that first increment, then you would partake of that most creative energy and it's life-giving and so on. Now, it turns out, I discovered that the definition of these stars was given 6,000 years ago. The qualities of each star was given 6,000 years ago. And you can see that in what's called the Taittiriya Aranyaka of Yajurveda. So in the ancient Vedic texts, it's about 6,000 years ago they were given. Why is it 6,000 years ago that you can date it? It's because that first increment of spring, the very first little number 1 increment, lined up with the star Kritika. Kritika happened to be at that time a star within the Taurus constellation. So we know that originally, when they first divided these sectors, this was the spring equinox was Taurus, the highest point was Leo, and this was Scorpio, and this was Capricorn, or yeah, this was, let me think here, I think it might have been Aquarius. So what happened was Kritika represented the beginning of spring, life-giving, fire energy, Agni, ignite. Everything ignites. The word ignite comes from the word Agni, Indo-European word meaning fire. So when this was formalized, when astrology was formalized during the Roman Empire, about 2,000 years ago, loosely about 2,000 years ago, I would say loosely because around 180 AD, Ptolemy, a great Greek philosopher and astrologer, scientist, he wrote a text on astrology. Tetrabiblios, I believe is the name of it. And he tried to explain some things, but it seems that if you draw a chart for 180 AD, you come up with Aries at that time was the beginning of spring. It was lined up with Aries, not Taurus anymore, like 4,000 years earlier. It was Aries. And then the second month was Taurus and so on. And there was a different star that started that first increment of spring. And that was Ashwini star. So Ashwini marked that first increment. It was in the same exact position as Kritika was 4,000 years earlier. Okay. Now here we come to a problem. And that's that in ancient times, just like even now, the ancient texts were revered. And they were taken to be an absolute rather than looking at the context and trying to understand what was being said, how things change over the centuries. So what happened was when they defined these 27 nakshatra qualities, they wrote it down and they said that the zodiac circle starts with Ashwini and Aries, and then they took the definition of Ashwini as it was 4,000 years earlier, and they said that's the quality of that increment, Ashwini. Now you realize, just takes a second to realize that Ashwini was not in that position many thousands of years ago, so it had different energetics. Ashwini, totally different energies. And so when you say Ashwini is the bringer of life, you don't even say that, because you go by the definition before. So this has been a problem in trying to understand the real subtle energetics of a person's nature when you look within a month. So you say, really, Ashwini is the same thing. It's a marker for the same position that the qualities that we call Kritika. So essentially, if you want to have a correct understanding of this, you have to translate each of these increment positions with their present stars. You have to kind of do a mapping of that. Mathematically, we say mapping. You map this star onto the star that was there 4,000 years earlier. And then you, because the definition of that position was 4,000 years earlier. The same thing is true for astrology nowadays. If you are going to go by the definition of 2,000 years ago, I mean, the constellations, this number one position was occupied by Aries then, now it's Pisces. That creates a dilemma. So in the East, spring is celebrated according to the books of 2,000 years ago, because they are revered. So spring is celebrated when the sun actually goes, literally is lined up with the constellation Aries. And then the ceremonies that are done to partake of that creative energy of spring are done then. The only problem with that is that now, as of this time period, this is the position in the sky of Aries. It has changed. So literally, so if you're going to celebrate the energies of spring and partake of those energies, and this would be where the sun is so-called exalted, it's coming back, then you're missing an opportunity. If you don't celebrate at the proper time, you're missing an opportunity to partake of those energies, to make use of those energies. So this dilemma has created this division between what people think is West and East, Eastern astrology and Western astrology. Now you have to realize Eastern astrology is very voluminous. It has tremendous number of techniques and sub things. It's, if you take the Western astrology, it's like a pocketbook version that fits inside this huge body of Vedic astrology. So Vedic astrology is definitely wonderful in its span of engineering and knowledge. The only problem is, if you're not going to hold to the right energetics, then then as time will go on, right now, the beginning of spring is being celebrated 1 month late. And then another 2,000 years, another 2,000 years, eventually spring will be celebrated during winter, if this is not corrected. So we have to use different labels than what we used thousands of years. We have to translate it. Now in the West, we had kind of the Socratic method, the questioning everything, the scientific method, and not just accepting everything on face value, but trying to understand why. That was the Greek methodology. Why does it work? That's why Ptolemy was talking about these different sectors, and he gave me a clue about it because he said, oh, during this time it's windy, air sign. Rain, water sign. Nothing mystical, just that particular time period there's this quality. And that 2,000 years ago, in the time of close to 2,000 years, in the time of Ptolemy, things were lined up with spring starting in Aries, then Taurus, and so on. So, in the West, what they did was, and there were great scientists that worked on this. Copernicus and Galileo and Newton, they all knew astrology. And Carl Jung, in more modern times, he thought it was so important that he tried to contact Sigmund Freud about it, as well as the astrologers of India, and he said that this is more than just synchronicity, it's causality is involved in this, and he understood this principle of the different sectors of the sky and so on. He didn't know all of Vedic astrology, but he understood this basic pattern, and he used it for his patients, something that has not been written or emphasized in books of psychology because not understanding the basis of all this, astrology was relegated to some kind of pseudoscience, mystical hocus pocus, you see, which is a loss to us. So a great mind like Carl Jung, he even wrote quite a bit. There's a whole book of his writings on astrology. So he was a great astrologer, but that part's been left out of the psychology books. And now, there are very many interesting facets to this understanding. First, so if you want to get an accurate energetics, we have to jump through a few hoops here. In the West, what they did was they kept the labels. So Aries is still Aries, Taurus is still Taurus, and so on. So whatever position Pisces originally was in this position, but now it's lined up here. So what they did was they rotated the chart. They just rotated the whole thing so that now Pisces can be called Aries. They tried to keep the same label. So in the West, that's what was done to compensate for this shifting in the heavens. And so Western astrology, to my utter amazement, after 30 years of doing Vedic astrology, actually turns out that the positions of the planets and so on, in terms of this matrix of this yearly chart, is actually quite accurate. And this is why sometimes people who have their Vedic astrology chart done, they say, but my Western astrologer, those positions, my being a Pisces or a Gemini or an Aries, that seemed more me than that. So in the East, as I say, they're going by the books and they haven't adjusted for that. So now if you're born in spring, they give you and you're really born at the Aries time, and now Pisces is over here, because the books say that Pisces is actually that peak of winter, the silent winter before spring. They attribute the qualities, your qualities of this, to this time of the year. And the energies are different. So instead of being a spring child, you become a winter child. And that has to be corrected. As I said, as time goes on, eventually spring, the constellation that designates the constellations will be such that spring, Aries, will be in a position where it's below the equator. given enough thousands of years. And then the peak of winter will be said, oh, this is the beginning of spring, because the books say that when the sun is in Aries, the books from thousands of years ago say when the sun is in Aries, that's the beginning of spring. And then the nakshatras, the stars, will be all different too. So in doing astrology, I've come to the conclusion, and again, this is an evolving process. I think we need to make further adjustments and understandings, and I'm still working on it. But so far, I've come to the understanding that we first have to translate the present positions into this matrix. I call it Kala Purusha, the matrix of time, the yearly Kala Purusha, the being of time. So first we put everything in the right, we label them, okay, we label them, this is Aries, this is like that, energetically, so we at least get the chart's energies properly. And then we have to, because we're rotating the whole chart, and all the stars will be as they were 2,000 years ago. I mean, we rotated to those 108 increments, and those labels, Aries with the first increment, like that, we give that label so we understand that that is the energetics. And now we have Ashwini or whatever in the beginning of spring, let's say, and now we have to take your chart, because you were born when the moon was not just necessarily in that first increment of spring, it might have been some other increment. So for your moon star, where your moon was, we have to take it back another 4,000 years, because whatever was the meaning 2,000 years ago of that star name, it was based on the qualities, the description of 4,000 years earlier, because it was in a certain increment that was associated with another star at that time. So if fortunately in astrology programs it's possible to do this, to set it back 2,000, basically just set it back. We call it the tropical, we said zero ayanamsha. That means no change since then. We just rotate it there to 2,000 years ago. And then for the stars, we have to map the star positions of each planet and the moon. We have to translate it to the actual meaning of the increment that they occupied, another star 6,000 years ago, 4,000 years earlier. It's not that hard, really. You just, so Ashwini would be this and so on. It's pretty easy. You just map one to another. And then you get the actual qualities of the person, not only the seasonal, the monthly time they're born, but you actually get the quality of the little increment of the month they were born in. So I think this is a lot to digest. And in the next video, I'd like to talk about how this yearly energetics, where you are born in the year, relates to the actual day, how they arrange the houses of astrology. What does that mean? It's modeled after the yearly chart. So I'd like to explain that in the next video. So take care.